Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. Once again, all you see here is for sale. Names of watches, references, and prices in the description below. Reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com for pricing and purchase details. And we're paying our highest prices of the year. This is crunch time. We are looking to build up holiday inventory. One watch or an entire collection with no upper limit on value paid. Sell me your watch. We are buying. And once again, reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Let's jump straight in with something that is remarkably fresh in every sense. This is the 2020 Rolex Oyster Perpetual 41. The 124-300, 41 millimeters and 904L stainless steel. Let's talk about the basic dimensions because these are new. 41 millimeter case, it's 11.7 millimeters thick and end link to end link. That is the absolute distance across the wrist. It's a big watch. 51.3 millimeters, meaning it's comparable to full bracelet, solid end link Submariners and Daytonas. Now on the wrist you can see it cuts a low figure. It's a good broad flat form and it really makes you comprehend just how non-round the Oyster case really is. It's more of a cushion case if we're entirely honest, and that's emphasized by the integration of the end links. Now it'll easily slide underneath the cuff. You can see the over the top shot. Let me pull my sleeve back, show you the down the barrel shot. Comfortable, flat, flush, and eternal. This truly was the first sports watch. In 1933, combining the perpetual winding system with the Oyster water-resistant case, 100 meters water-resistant. There's a new movement, caliber 3230 in here, 3-day power reserve, anti-magnetic shock-resistant. Let's do a loom shot. And you can see the signature Rolex Chroma Blue. It's a gorgeous timepiece. The double indices make this one particularly easy to read at night and robustly loomed. This is worthy of a dive watch. Truly impressive in every regard. And believe it or not, this is now the entry-level Rolex. A few more changes for the Oyster Perpetual. Compared to the previous models, you can see the internal of the clasp is finished. It's all of high polish. You can see that the crown, as ever, is embossed, but then under the crown, an upgrade, Rolex Easylink, previously not featured on the Oyster Perpetuals. So you're getting some upgrades here. Aesthetically, it's still very much the Rolex Oyster, and to be perfectly honest, this model line changes less from generation to generation than the Subs, the GMTs, and even the Daytonas. This is truly the Rolex. Now let's jump to something a little bit more involved. This is the 2017 version of the Rolex Sky-Dweller. Now, a lot of things to love here. First, it's mostly stainless steel, so you're not paying a precious metal premium. The bezel is still white gold, or gray gold, I should say. The rest of the case, 42 millimeters, 904L steel. You can see this is a little bit more deluxe in its presentation with polished centers. You have that raised and relieved crown rather than embossed, and then you have a straight through polished stripe that runs all the way through a clasp. That also includes the 5mm Easylink quick adjustment system, 100 meters water resistant in spite of the complications. One of the changes that I really liked here was the fully loomed dial, which makes the watch a lot easier to read than previous Sky-Dwellers. This one does have the blue metallic sunburst dial, and a lot to love here. Now the watch is a 3-day power reserve, a chronometer, 100 meters water resistant. In the first position, the crown winds, but here's the thing, nothing happens when you pull it out. Now you turn the bezel one click, and now you gain the ability to adjust the date forward or backwards. And you can see, because there is a little aperture outboard of each index, there's a red floater that moves in either direction. Watch its position, and it moves forward or backwards, representing the change of the month. 12 months, 12 hours. So what you're looking at right here is September 1st, 9/1. Annual calendar needs to be reset only once a year during the jump from February to March. There's also a second time zone. Turn the bezel one more click. This is the ring command bezel, and it's technically part of the movement. And now you have the ability to jump the hour hand while everything else continues. The watch keeps on keeping on, and you can turn the date in one direction. It's not bi-directional as in the primary setting mode. Turn it one more click, and now you can see everything is synchronized, and the second hand is stopped. This is the stop seconds mode. in which you can set that 24-hour reference ring centrally. You set that reference ring first, it's an independent time zone, then you set your local time. This is a watch that offers an awful lot of complication and utility. I've always thought of it as one of the ultimate traveler's watches and one of the most useful and well-rounded timepieces you can buy. 42 millimeters, so it's big for a Rolex dress watch. It's really a giant Datejust if you look at the case profile, but it's a timepiece that sits very comfortable on my wrist, and while it might not clear the tightest of sleeves, you'd really have to be pretty buttoned down for your sleeve to fail to clear this watch. This is absolutely viable as a dress watch. Now let's talk about dress watches, but go way up market here, and let's do it with Patek Philippe. 5905, 42 millimeters, gorgeous scalloped flanks. This, the 5905 Platinum, launched at Baselworld 2015. It's a lot like the 5960, but whereas that is a more involved and busy dial and a 40.5 millimeter case, this is a cleaner, all-metal sector dial with both the rings and the partitions in metal and metallic finish. And then you've got that 42 millimeter case that features the scalloped elements and a concave bezel, and these visually pare down the apparent mass. Now, in common with the 5960, it is an annual calendar with a flyback chronograph, restart and reset with one push of the trigger. You also have a 60-minute chronograph register, and I happen to prefer that to 30-minute registers because it's just more natural. There are 60 minutes in an hour, and there should be 60 minutes on the minute register. It just makes more sense. You can see the AM/PM indicator. It'll turn blue during those hours in which you are prohibited from using pusher adjusters to adjust the calendar. So that's your AM/PM index. And then you have aperture style calendar. You have the day, the date, and the month. Again, as with annual calendars, you make one adjustment per year during the jump from February to March. The dial is blue sunburst, and you can see those polished rings and the white gold individual indices that are diamond polished with micrometric tools to create those sharp gem-like facets. So this is an all metal sector dial, and there is a little bit of lume on the dial, and we may as well do a lume shot with this watch. And we're back with the 5905P, and heck, why not? Here's the, well, that's the Oyster Perpetual right there. Let me grab the Sky-Dweller. Here's the Sky-Dweller, since I promised you this is a fully loomed Sky-Dweller. But that right there is the 5905, and that's plenty of lume for a dress watch. Now, surprisingly, I have another Patek here that is also loomed and extravagant in every regard. Launched in 2015, this is the 5370P. Now, there's a new blue dial version, but that feels a little bit like a 2020 cliche to me, and I happen to prefer this version by far. 41 millimeters in platinum, you can see it too has a handsomely sculpted case flank. It's more involved than the 5905, and you can see that with lovely satin finish internally. It's relieved and channeled, and then you have these white gold cabochon outboard flanking the strap. You can see that it has a coaxial pusher for the retropont system, and like the 5905, it has a very subtle concave bezel profile. The dial is where this one really pulls ahead. It is black enamel. Let me grab my polishing cloth. Eagle-eyed observers will note my old watch you want polishing cloth in action. Now, it is a vitreous enamel dial, black enamel, done in-house by Patek. You can see the white on black creates a spectacular contrast, and as with the most special of Patek Philippe watches, this timepiece includes white gold applique brigade numerals. Now, it's a coaxial split second, which means you can split the seconds by pressing the pusher at 3 o'clock, and of course you can start, stop, and operate it like a conventional chrono. Turn it all over, and one of the advantages of this movement is that it is both spectacular and it puts all of its refinement on display. You can see the watch includes 2 column wheels. The primary column wheel, capped and black polished, a fully jeweled lateral clutch. You can see the second column wheel and a maze of springs over the pincer system that activates the retropont pause, and then you've got a free sprung balance beating away at 28.8, Gyromax style free sprung 6 position adjusted handmade brigade overcoil, 2 column wheels, lateral clutch, fully jeweled, steel components satin and beveled for the chronograph, and then bridges rhodium plated brass for the movement. And of course, this being a modern Patek caliber, it does feature hacking seconds. I also like the fact that it has a 65-hour manual wind power reserve, and instantaneous jumping minutes. So the refinements here runneth over. Now we're going to throw this one on the wrist. You're going to get a good sense of it. It's not a small watch. For a Patek Philippe dress complication, 41 millimeters is getting close to as big as they come before we get into the Galacticos, like the Sky Moon Tourbillon. Now you can see here it's 49.9 millimeters lug to lug, giving you a real good sense of the watch down the barrel. I wouldn't recommend it for wrists smaller than 15 centimeters circumference. And of course it is a platinum Patek, which is why it has that brilliant cut top vessels and diamond between the lugs. Two sports watches from a little bit off the beaten path. Let's talk about the more common of the two. And the 50 Fathoms bathyscaphe in black ceramic is common only by the standards of that other watch you just saw. This is a fairly rare watch. A true handmade luxury timepiece. It's a 300-meter diver. It has the 43.6 millimeter black ceramic bathyscaphe case that we first saw back in 2013. The original bathyscaphe was launched in 1957, and it was more of a civilian-oriented, stripped-down diver, which is why this watch feels distinctly more vintage in profile than today's 5015. This is the reference 5000. You can see there's minimal beveling. It's got a nice thin case band, big crown architecture, no crown guards, squared off lugs, baton style hands with needle extensions. It's designed to look like a 1950s diver, and you can see it all ceramic, so it's feather light on the wrist, very scratch resistant, need never be refinished, and you can tell this watch has never been refinished. That's why it's fun to buy ceramic watches pre-owned. They're basically as built. Ceramic insert and a ceramic bezel. Let's have a listen to the diving ratchet. It's very slick, very smooth, super refined, setting the standard for that kind of feel. Line up the luminescent pearl with the baton style hand and you have that 0 to 60-minute timer. Stop seconds, quick set date, applique indices. There will be a lume shot, caliber 1315. Now you can see this watch is 300 meters water resistant, and yet it includes a display caseback, and yet it's just as anti-magnetic as the solid caseback 5015. How is that done? Well, there is a silicone hairspring, so it's anti-magnetic. The bridges are gorgeous with a lovely spiral satin grain rather than a cliched Côte de Genève. You can see the beveling is enormous. We're not quite at Philippe Dufour levels, but you can see how broad and bright it is. Highly unconventional for Swatch Group or major group brand movements to have beveling this broad. This takes me back to the early Roger Dubuis timepieces, and to see it on a Blancpain is extraordinary. Free sprung balance, very shock resistant, 6-position adjustment, 3 mainspring barrels, and a 120-hour or 5-day power reserve. Now, it's a big watch at 43.6, but in ceramic, it wears light. So again, you can see that down the barrel shot, and I've got plenty of clearance on each side of my wrist. I would wear this on a wrist as small as 14 centimeters, and that largely because of the short lugs and the fact that in ceramic it is very light. Let's take a look at that other model that just flashed across the screen. Parmigiani Pershing. Now the Pershing series was launched in the late 2000s as a partnership between Parmigiani Watches of Fleurier and Pershing Yachts of Italy. And so you can see that this Pershing chrono, 42 millimeters in stainless steel, features the image of a Pershing yacht on the reverse side, and it is an impressive machine, but it's the ergonomics of this watch that really set it apart. Though a 42 millimeter, it's only 48.8 millimeters from lug to lug, which is a lot smaller than you'd expect. You can also see that the shape of the lugs, designed specifically per Michel Parmigiani to separate the case from the lug profile and make the watch overall more wearable, which is why I would wear this 42 on a wrist as small as 14 centimeters. It's neither tall nor thin. It's a large watch, but it's not overpowering, and as you can really see, I'm going to pull my sleeve back, it's the effective camber or curvature of the case here that makes this one sit like a limpet on your wrist. It's also gorgeous with a number of different textures and tones. You can see the satin finish of the bezel, the rubber appurtenances, the polished steel of the case. Getting a little bit closer, we can take a look at the dial, featuring Parmigiani's distinctive delta-shaped hands. You'll note that the tachometer is calibrated for relatively low absolute values because this is, after all, a yachting chronograph. We're not going to be timing race cars or aircraft using this tach. There is a diving bezel. It is unidirectional. Technically, this watch, which is 100 meters water resistant, is a light-duty diver. It features a Parmigiani manufactured chronograph caliber with a 50-hour automatic winding power reserve, a screw-down crown, stop seconds, and a quick set date, and of course, a lovely dial with radially arrayed indices and numerals. We can do a lume shot here. You have those blazing Parmigiani delta-shaped hands, somewhere between alpha hands and Dauphine. So that's a full-service sports watch from Parmigiani with a full deployant clasp. Let's talk about a watch that's somewhere between a dress watch and a sports watch. This is the Grand Seiko Autumn, the High-Beat Automatic SBGH 269, a fall 2019 lacquer-dialed tribute to autumn in Japan. Now you can see the dial, and I've done my best to remove my fingerprints, features a top to bottom striation, so it's not even in tone. There's a little bit of variation, almost like a varnished floor. It's designed to capture the full color of autumn in Japan, full spectrum from side to side, and that variation, which is vertically striated, gives an order and a life to this dial. And that's before we get into the hand-finished individual indices and the hands at center, which you can see are a combination of razor polished edges and satin tops. Yellow gold seconds hand, yellow gold logo, 36,000 vibrations per hour. There is a lovely green oxidized automatic winding rotor on the case back, and the watch has a 55-hour automatic winding power reserve. It's 100 meters water resistant. The caliber is Grand Seiko's own, beaten away at 10 beats per second for 55 hours. Impressive power reserve for a high beat movement. Also featuring stop seconds and a quick set date. It is accurate to no worse than -3 + 5 seconds per day, which exceeds the 24-hour accepted deviation of a Swiss COSC chronometer. Full bracelet, nicely made with a combination of satin, polished intermediates, a rolled flank, and a polished outer face. Individual links are fixed by screws, and you can see there is one half link on each side of the clasp for fine sizing. At 39.5 millimeters, the size should be universal. Just about everyone can wear this watch well. Exceptionally comfortable, and you can see that there's some effective camber to the case, so it curves around your wrist. It has that Zaratsu tinplate black polish, by which the polished components of the case are held directly against a spinning tinplate and milled using eye-hand coordination and craft knowledge. It takes about 3 years to master, and you can see that this is optically smooth, mirrored polish on the case. Crafted on European Zolitz machines. Ironically, the foremost practitioners of this art, this black polishing, are now the folks at Grand Seiko. They call it Zaratsu polish, and you can really see how it stands apart right there. This is a hand-finished watch. We now jump into the world of FP Journe. From Japan to Geneva, we're talking about a gorgeous platinum FP Journe Chronometer Souverain Mother of Pearl. Now, this is a series that launched in 2012. They are boutique exclusives, and you have Mother of Pearl with lovely blue printing surrounding a silver white center. It is the Chronometer Souverain, 8.4 millimeters thick, 48 millimeters lug to lug. This is a 40 millimeter platinum case, and the combination of that dial with this strap is beyond striking. It's so vivid, it jumps off the screen. We'll talk about the strap in a moment, but you can see how it's keyed perfectly to the blue of the printing as well as the hands. Easily sliding underneath the dress cuff, no complaints there. This is a watch that I could recommend for a wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference, and you can feel the substance of it because not only is it a platinum case, but when you roll it over, you could see that the caliber 1304 is made of solid gold. 18 karat rose gold bridges and plates, 6-position adjustment like a chronometer, twin mainspring barrels, so that the balance amplitude stays very similar after 24 hours, after 48 hours. It has a 56-hour absolute power reserve, and you're going to want to wind at the same time every day, but the idea here is that it will keep better time than a COSC chronometer, which is why FP Journe dares to call his watches chronometer in spite of not earning the COSC certificate. I've tested, and truth or BS, it holds up. These watches run better than COSC. Now you can also see that there's no obvious junction between the escapement and the barrels, and that's because the entire drivetrain runs under the dial. The hidden train means that Journe can open these large gulfs between major structures. So you've got a bridge for the escape wheel as well as the terminal end of the drivetrain, a bridge for the balance, a bridge for the barrels, but there's really nothing to clutter the space in between. So you have engine turning under the balance, you have a lovely satin rayon pattern that explodes out from under the barrels, and then you have lovely Côte de Genève across the bridges with satin finished wheels and black polished screws. That's a good looking watch, but if you prefer an automatic timepiece, well, we have that too. Now, both of these watches, you should understand, are the same size, 40 millimeters in platinum. Both are part of the Mother of Pearl collection. But what we have here, as you can see, an Octo automatic with a moon phase and a remarkably impressive 5-day chronometric power reserve, and 7-day absolute. In truth, though these watches are good timekeepers for 5 days of power reserve, at the death, they will run for almost 7 days, 160 hours. They're adjusted in 5 positions, and as with the Chronomètre Souverain, they are designed to keep chronometer grade time, but there's a lot going on this dial. You can see moon phase, power reserve indicator, and a double-digit date. There's a quick set for both the moon phase and the double date. Throw this watch on the wrist. It's a bit heftier than the other. There's a lot more platinum here as the case is more substantial and the watch is thicker, but it has the same physical footprint on the wrist. So if you have that 13.5 centimeter circumference wrist, you're going to wear this one well. Again, these are both boutique and Espace exclusives. The mother of pearl series is scarcely made, and the attention to detail is impressive. Journe building movements, cases, and dials all. This is done in-house. You can even see there's blueprinting on the individual date discs, and no stone and no detail left unturned or overlooked. And if you are a Journe collector, you've probably taken note that there are precious few truly swimmable, water-resistant options at FP Journe, and the Elegant 48, launched in 2016, is easily the most swimmable Journe. Now this is the Elegant 48, or I should say Elegant 48 Titanite, which is a hard coating ceramic-like over the titanium 48mm lug-to-lug base. So this watch is rated at 30 meters, but it has a screw-down crown, a rare feature on Journe watches, and they're actually tested to 50 meters at the factory. So per Journe itself, or Montre Journe, the organization, this is a swimmable watch. So let's talk a little bit more about the size. 48 describes the distance from lug to lug. The watch is a bit larger than 39 millimeters from side to side, and it's only 7.7 millimeters thick. Now you throw it on the wrist, it is very comfortable. It's not just the lightness of the case, which is extraordinary, it's the shape of the case back and the curve of the lugs. This is a factory strap, giving the watch a lovely and muted color combination of gray and blue. It is a sort of ultramarine blue and very comfortable. You can see how easily it slides underneath the cuff. It could easily be a dress watch, but it is a sports watch at heart. Getting a little bit closer to the dial, you can see that there's a small oscillating weight, and that's designed to wake the watch up. After 30 minutes, it effectively goes to sleep, where the microprocessor, and it is a gorgeous movement, the microprocessor remembers the time, but it stops the stepper motors that run the hands. This is to save energy, and in absolute standby mode, unused, the watch could sit and retain its battery charge and be potentially functional for 18 years. On the wrist, it's going to run somewhere between 10 and 12 years, so you're getting a lot of endurance here. And the watch does feature stop seconds, so you can set it precisely. It features a remarkable caliber 1210 with lavish rose gold embellishment. You can see even the printed circuit board has been highly stylized by FP Journe himself. The timepiece, of course, remarkably loomed. It's a sort of negative, and I'll demonstrate what this means in a moment, but the entire dial is a block of superluminova. Okay, now we're back with the Elegant 48, and you can see what I mean about the dial. You see the dial glowing, and then there are patches of black as the printing is not translucent, so you can see the dial printing the numerals, the railroad track, and the small seconds. This is a timepiece that will wake up. If you pick it up, that oscillating weight wakes up the movement, and the hands will drive themselves to represent the correct time at the moment you pick up the watch. And they will actually take the shortest route to the correct time, so the hands can drive in either direction as they auto-correct when the watch wakes up. A truly special piece from Journe, and in Titanite even more scratch resistant than before. Okay, now comes the German detour in today's show, and we're going to start with a watch that launched at Baselworld 2008. This is the Pano Tourbillon XL. 42 millimeters in white gold. The timepiece looks like a New York black and white cookie crossed with the original JLC Gyro Tourbillon. So if you remember the Jaeger-LeCoultre Gyro Tourbillon, there's definitely an air of that, and a lovely bifurcation of the dial between silver white at the top and black at the bottom. It has a retrograde date indicator, a power reserve indicator for its roughly 42 hours of manual wind reserve de marche, surprisingly 2 loomed hands on its dial, and then there is the pièce de résistance. You can see the caliber, and it's handsome, nicely decorated, and manually so, but it manages to get all of the action on the dial side. Of course, the flying tourbillon, invented by Alfred Helwig in Glashütte, and you can see a flying tourbillon is used. And the watch has a lovely filigree style black polished and micro beveled wire style cage for the tourbillon. It is a 1-minute tourbillon with an overcoil hairspring that is as beautiful as it is delicate. The timepiece featuring a 21/6 beat rate, and as you can see, as a 1-minute tourbillon, it doubles as the seconds hand for the dial. What really sets it apart is the use of a cut diamond capstone atop the balance staff, seriously differentiating this watch from competitors. It's along the lines of what Lange does. These two German brands, Lange and Glashütte Original, have made diamonds acceptable in men's watches by making diamonds part of the movement. The movement is caliber 4103, and you can see the reverse of the watch is quite special. It has been freehand engraved, and it looks gorgeous. You can see everything has been individually engraved with a burin. Lucky number 100, that's a nice round number to add to the collection. All of this has been done manually, and you can see how beautifully it's been cut. The movement features jeweled chaton holding pivot jewels. It also features a double solarization manually applied, as you can see on the ratchet wheel adjacent to a black polished click. There's a lovely swan's neck style pocket watch inspired click spring, and then you can see the train driving the tourbillon from the underside with Glashütte stripes and both black polished and fired blue screws. A truly special watch. Includes a matching white gold deployant clasp, and it's quite flat in profile, meaning it sits broad and flush on your wrist. It's a very handsome timepiece, and again, with lume, it's a little bit more practical than you might have suspected. It will easily slide underneath the cuff. It has a graceful, classical, and timeless case profile with short, tightly downward curved lugs, so it will fit on a smaller wrist, such as, for example, 13.5 to 14 centimeters circumference. Let's take one last look at that tourbillon. That was worth the stop and hold. That said, if you want to own horological royalty from a Lange & Söhne, one of the big three of the brand, we have the Datograph flyback, and this is the post-2012 41mm platinum Datograph up-down. So you've got, as ever, a flyback chronograph that you can reset with a push of the trigger down at 4 o'clock. Double-digit date, there's a pusher adjust for that, and you've got a power reserve indicator on the dial side, which makes sense on a manual wind watch. Now, the watch has a 60-hour power reserve compared to the 36 hours of the original Datograph. So we have an upgrade of the caliber L951 here. Turn the watch back to the dial side. You'll note that there's a step for the tachymeter outboard, which gives the dial wonderful depth. You'll also note that it is a loomed watch, which makes it more practical. There is luminescence on this dial. The dial is made of sterling silver and then black galvanized, which means the silver elements you see, such as the registers, are the actual metal itself. It's a precious metal dial in a precious metal case. It's technically 40.9 millimeters in diameter. Turn it over, caliber L951, as gorgeous as ever. You can see this is an evolution, the L9516. The L951 came out on the original Datograph in 1999. Now, it's still got that flyback chronograph functionality, but you can see it is a gorgeous column wheel and lateral clutch chrono. Note that the clutch itself features both sharp outward and sharp inward angles, and that's just the clutch. Components that are steel are satin finished on their top and beveled on their edges, and you can see that the same is true of the bridges, albeit with Glashütte stripes across their top rather than satin. You could see that mirrored beveling lighting up all across the components of the chronograph, but also the structural bridges of the movement. Note the use of black polish for both the swan's neck regulator and the cover of the escape wheel. It continues, as you can see, components of the clutch are black polished, and you'll also note that they're both black polished and blued screws. The black polished screws here are used for adjustment of the mechanism. The blued screws are used for physical assembly, so that's how the watchmaker can distinguish between the two. The balance beats sway at 18,000 vibrations per hour. It does feature stop seconds or hacking, and it uses a handmade overcoil hairspring for concentric beating in any orientation. The watch is also adjusted in 5 positions. Throw it on the wrist, it is substantial. You feel the mass of this watch. If you want a timepiece that's feather light, this isn't for you. This is classical precious metal pull, serious heft on the wrist to remind you where the money went. And this is a timepiece that cuts a striking figure with the white metal case and the black dial. There's a lot of inherent power here. This is the heart and soul of a Lange & Söhne. If you're going to collect the brand, get yourself a Lange 1, a Datograph, and a Zeitwerk, and then build out your collection. You need the big three. If you're going to own just one Lange, I can't argue with a Datograph. Now, if you would like to spend less money on your German watch, that's possible too. Nomos Glashütte, a company out of the same historic glass-blowing, silversmithing, and watchmaking town as Glashütte Original and Lange, they give us this 39.9 millimeter Ahoy Atlantic Blau. Now, the timepiece is 10.9 millimeters thick, but 200 meters water resistant. It's a characteristic Nomos design in that it's not too large, it's slim in profile, and it has extravagant lugs. Now, I wouldn't call them flamboyant, but they certainly clash in a sort of calculated dissonance with the rather orthodox cylindrical profile of the case. These are straight and then sharply angled like a hook, and you can see how they have a lot of personality as they're physically distinct from the case. Now, the case also has a crown guard structure. This is not a dive watch because, for example, it doesn't have a rotating reference bezel, but at 200 meters water resistant, you can take it to diving style depths. Now, the watch has a lovely Atlantic blue or Atlantic Blau dial, and you can see there's a lot going on for a relatively simple dial. No date, so there's symmetry, but note the use of a lovely golden tone for the printing. Note the use of contrasting colors. You've got the golden tone, you've got the black of the indices, the Atlantic Blau of the dial, the key lime of the lume on the hands, which are themselves a lovely oxidized golden bronze, and then there's the red shock of the hand in the concentric circular stamped sunken sub-seconds. Turn it over, you can see a movement, manufacture, 43 hours power reserve, automatic winding, and as you will note, 200 meters water resistant. My particular favorite features here are the double solarization manually applied to the ratchet wheel and the firing of the screws. Those are not chemically dyed, those are fired. Now, what appears at first glance to be a NATO strap is actually a textile strap that works like a conventional strap, and I'm happy to say that you don't have to worry about the underslung thickness or blocked case back of a NATO. This gives you that same look without all of the compromises. And you can see this is a very thin watch for its water resistance. It's a handsome all-arounder and a great way to buy a one watch if you're shopping for a graduate or marking a milestone in your life or that of a burgeoning watch enthusiast. And again, those lugs give it a lot of character. Now, let's take a look at a brand that's near and dear to my heart, near and dear to my wrist, because I am a Zinn owner, and this is the Zinn 900S. They like to call it their large pilot's chronograph, and it is chock-a-block with proprietary Zinn technology. The basics: steel case tegament, which means that the surface hardening of the case steel itself via carbon diffusion, it's 1200 Vickers, which is getting close to ceramic. There is then a hard black coating put over that tegament, the idea being that with a hardened base, you can't accidentally impact the exterior and dent the metal underneath, thereby cracking the coating. The coating is so hard on watches that feature this kind of diamond-like carbon that oftentimes the impact damages not the coating, but the soft metal underneath. With the tegament underneath the hard black, you wind up with an indelible surface that is hard underneath and even harder on its surface. Now, the watch is about 15.6 millimeters thick, 51 millimeters lug to lug, so it's not as big as it looks. It's a large pilot chronograph, but nowhere near an IWC big pilot. This is Zinn's own case and bracelet. They make them both, and you can see that it has a nice, stark, but comfortable stance on the wrist, an instrument watch par excellence. You can also see the contrast of the dial. Now, what I like here is that you have a couple of different timing instruments. There is a primary time zone, there's a 24-hour second time zone, and then you have a timing bezel that you can use. Easy to line up. You now have a 0 to 60-minute timing instrument, and of course you have that secondary time zone, which you can use to keep track of the place where you are not. In the other direction, it activates a quick set. This is a ETA 2893 base, so most GMT watches do not have a conventional quick set. The ETA 2892 based 2893 does have a conventional quick set. Now, I'll also mention the watch is 200 meters water resistant, 80,000 ampere per meter or Milgauss anti-magnetic, so it's as anti-magnetic as a Rolex Milgauss, and it features the AR dehumidification system. So you can see AR on the dial. Not only is it anti-magnetic, but it has this replaceable copper sulfate capsule in the flank that will pull moisture out of the interior of the case, and when it leaves Zinn, it's filled with nitrogen. Yes, it says AR, but it's not argon. For the last few years, it has been nitrogen to displace any dust and moisture from the case at the point of manufacture. The bracelet is gorgeous in its construction, a 5-link design. Note the use of hex screws rather than conventional screws. There are also half links for precise sizing, and then an engine turned and lovely bright polished double deployant with twin trigger release. Again, 200 meters water resistant, so while this is a travel time pilot's chronograph, it is by no means a high and dry watch. Let's take a look at the lume shot. Oh, it is an embarrassment of riches. You can see that internally mobile bidirectional bezel that can be used for timing. You could see this thing through London fog. We approach the end. This was probably the best new chronograph of 2019. A GMT, a peripheral rotor automatic, a chronograph column wheel, all of that 42 millimeters in titanium and only 6.9 millimeters thick. This is the Bulgari Octo chronograph GMT, and all in titanium with matching media blasted titanium bracelet. It wears like a second skin. The movement, which of course is all of those things I just mentioned, but it's only 3.3 millimeters thick. That's how the watch manages to be under 7 millimeters thick overall. Although it's a 42, it doesn't wear that large. I can recommend it for a wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference, and as light as it is, you might shoot furtive, panicked glances at your wrist, wondering if it's still there. Now, the dial is a lovely transferred index, media blasted titanium base, so the dial actually matches the case and finish as well as material. There is a pusher adjuster over at 9 o'clock that adjusts the local time independently, and what appears to be a register of the chronograph at 3 o'clock is actually the 24-hour second time zone. Now, the watch has beautifully integrated chronograph pushers, and you can see, well, I should probably have wound this one first, but they are perfectly integrated into the design of the watch. Now, the timepiece, if you turn it over, features caliber BVL 318 that is based on the Tourbillon automatic movement, which is to say they could have just added a chronograph module to the BVL 138 on the Octo automatic, but instead of upgrading a lower level movement, they transferred a higher level movement, basically putting all of the chronograph components in the center of the donut and then allowing the winding system from the Tourbillon to sit around the outer edge. And there's no tungsten or gold here. The rotor itself is platinum, so maximum winding efficiency. I can show you how that rotor moves. It winds the watch and energizes a 55-hour power reserve, so had I wound this thing ahead of time, it would have been good for 55 hours of operation, which is incredible, again, considering the thickness of this movement. 55-hour power reserve, automatic winding, a GMT, and a column wheel chronograph, all of it featuring gorgeous beveling. This is a combination of mechanical and hand finish, much like you'll find on an Audemars Piguet. Your run-of-the-mill Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Automatic or Code 1159 Chrono is finished no better than this, and this is a better value proposition. Again, throw it on the wrist, super light, comfortable, nicely proportioned, perfectly dimensioned, and with a case that is already establishing itself amongst the nomenclatura of the watch world. This is a brand and a model line on the rise, and this is one of the best. That said, sometimes nothing but the best will do. And the Bulgari Octo Tourbillon Ultra Narrow came out in 2016 at Baselworld, combining the titanium case with an ultra narrow black polish. Now you can see it's a combination of satin and black polish, to be precise, and this creates a lovely contrast that's not actually present on the all-media blasted titanium Octo Finissimo. You can see the combination of polish and satin, and what this does is it creates the contrast that's missing on the media blasted models, making this sharper and the alleged 110 individual planes of the case more distinct. Now you can see there is a ceramic cabochon in a rose gold crown. All of this is only 5 millimeters thick. The movement, which is a 52-hour power reserve flying tourbillon, is only 1.95 millimeters thick. On the dial you can see razor thin rose gold applique, rose gold hands, and then a lovely flying tourbillon that's been entirely black polished on its top. It beats away at 21.6, and you'll note it's free sprung for precise adjustment and durability. The contrast on the dial side is outstanding. It's easy to read. It's also chatty, as if you listen, you can really hear this tourbillon. It is quite audible. Let me hold it up to the mic and see if you can hear it. Turn it all over, and the movement's just as impressive. BVL 268, you can see that it uses ball bearings for the tourbillon carriage rather than conventional jeweled pivots, and that it has a hanging barrel. All of this in the name of making it thinner. You can also see the keyless works that operates as a clutch system, a differential for setting and winding the watch, and the finish is outstanding with satin beveled edges, black polished screws, and even engine turning. A gorgeous composite of titanium and DLC black with rose gold accents and ultra haute de gamme watchmaking from the Vallée de Jeu. This is a true haute de gamme option. Haute Horlogerie from the people who used to build Gerald Genta high complications. That's manufacturer Bulgari. They make their movements, their cases, their clasps, even their dials. Everything is in-house. Remember, reach out to me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com, to buy anything you see here or inquire about price. And sell me your watch, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. We are stocking up for the holidays. Time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.